So here we go. Greetings, fellow Polonians and friends, and welcome to our POSSE EDU webinar. I'm Dr. Gene Sokolowski, POSSE EDU president, and our topic is Ongoing Jewish Polonophobia, Effects on Poles. By way of quick background, we at POSSE EDU are an educational organization, and our mission is to educate the American public accurately on key aspects of Polish and Polish-American history, culture, and relevant current events. Our guest speaker is Mr. Jan Peczkis, whom many of you know for his insightful analyses of over 1,800 works by Polish, Jewish, and other authors on historical as well as contemporary Polish-Jewish interrelations. Now, Jan's analyses of the Holocaust literature in particular reveal significant falsifications, misrepresentations, and material omissions about Poland and the Poles, which largely explains why Polish-Jewish relations remain problematic. So Jan, welcome, and thank you for being our guest speaker. So it looks like we've lost Jan again. I'm not sure what to tell you at this point. I'm going to, let me go ahead and hit audio mute and video blackout for 2 seconds. I'm going to go give Jan a call. So, oh, there he is. Disregard. Okay. So Jan, you're back in. Here we go. Okay. Okay, I've done everything with the welcome, and what I'm going to do now is share, and we'll go directly to your slides, Jan. So bear with us. And so this is the cover slide of Jan's. What I'd like to point out that we have a number of URLs on the cover slide, as you see. The first is Jan's comprehensive online database website titled Jews and Poles Database. Jan's analyses of the many works that he has reviewed are fully searchable by keyword phrase identifiers, as well as by author, book title, or year of publication. And his topic guide provides an extensive list of phrases, each of which directs viewers to the answers of many common questions related to Polish-Jewish relations. Now, the second website you see there is titled Justice for Polish Victims of the Second World War. It provides comprehensive information on this topic under various categories, and it does so in a visually oriented format. And then as you see the third URL, you can view our webinars that have been posted to YouTube thus far. So our webinar procedure will be as follows. First, we'll show Jan's slide, and then second, while the slide is shown, I'll present a question for that slide or following slides. And third, Jan will address the question by discussing in detail that slide or following slides. So we'll go ahead and go with full view here on the screen. And we'll start with our questions on the first slide. Now, Jan, we see that neither Polish-Jewish dialogue nor the new trend in Polish philo-Semitism has stemmed the tide of Jewish Polonophobia. So in this slide and in the next, tell us why these actions have not been effective and why they have been essentially futile.
Okay, well, first of all, we realize that there are sincere Jews and sincere Poles that want to improve relations between the two groups. But the problem is, even when it's sincere, it doesn't really change anything. Let us look at the gypsy dialogue with the Jews. One gypsy author writes, none of this undoes the history of the uneven resources that members of the two groups have before them. Good intentions and a will to learn do not change access to expertise or economic and political capital. Certainly. Growing numbers of Jews have agreed to say that Roma suffered like us, or maybe the Jews have suffered like the Poles, whereas Roma and Poles often continue to make their suffering visible by claiming that they suffered like the Jews. It's still a very unequal relationship because of Holocaust supremacy. One is an act of solidarity with those not similarly recognized, the Gypsies and the Poles, and the other is a demand of justice from the Gypsies and the Poles. So even if it's sincere, it does not change anything. Holocaust supremacy still reigns. Holocaust dominates our societies. And this was shown recently. The National Education Association came out, it's kind of pro-Palestinian, leftist, and it came out, referred to victims of the Holocaust from different faiths. And so it expanded the Holocaust to cover other genocides that didn't explicitly mention the Jews. The Jews were absolutely furious. They had an absolute conniption. How could this be? It shows just how jealous the Jews are in protecting the hegemony of the term Holocaust to refer only to Jews and for Jews to get the lion's share of the attention. Sharing their suffering with other people, admitting that other people suffer on a co-equal footing is anathema to them, unthinkable. Well, so far we've considered sincere dialogue. What about dialogue that's not sincere? Well, first thing I believe is possible. I've been personally involved in Polish-Jewish dialogue, and I found that the Jews commonly make all the demands. They join with the Poles. Right away, they start all kinds of accusations and demands, and Poles are just supposed to listen. Then I know there's Poles who believe that Jews do this dialogue because they want to make it sound like they're friendly to the Poles, even though they're not, like making the concessions, get concessions from the Poles. For example, Nostra Aetate, the church renounced any belief that Jews were collectively responsible for the crucifixion of Christ. And then we remember the church adopted the idea, conceding to the Jews that Christians didn't do as much as they could have done to the Jews. But guess what? The Jews were not satisfied. They wanted more demands. They wanted everybody to be blamed, the church entirely, everyone in the church to be blamed for anti-Semitism, not just these two things. So these were unilateral concessions, Nostra Aetate. First of all, the church never claimed that all Jews were responsible for the crucifixion of Christ or forever responsible for the crucifixion of Christ. But they conceded that to the Jews, and now Jews can use it for propaganda purposes. See, the church admitted that it caused the Holocaust by teaching the crucifixion of Christ, Jews and the crucifixion of Christ. That's nonsense. Hitler himself said, if international Jewry creates another world war, the end result will be the extermination of the Jewish race in Europe. It had nothing to do with Christianity, had nothing to do with the crucifixion of Christ. Yet the church has conceded that and given them a propaganda tool. And also this, we remember the idea that Christians did not live up to their obligations. Well, who did? Who lived up to what obligations during what genocide? That plays into the game. Shift the focus on Christians not doing enough to help Jews over instead of German guilt. Finally, this whole thing about dialogue, unfortunately, nothing at all has changed, not only in the power relationship, but in the Jewish aggression, okay? The Jews continue blaming everything on the Poles. The Jews get a pass. They're never criticized for their crimes. We always hear about Polish anti-Semitism. We never hear about the wrongs Jews have done to Poland. It's always the blame Poles narrative. And the Holocaust industry always continues. Nothing changes. Dialogue or not, it makes nothing. And Germany has paid the Jews, but it's barely paid the Poles. Dialogue does not change that. For real friendship to come, there has to be an even-handed study of Jewish crimes against Poles along with Polish crimes against Jews, instead of Poles being blamed for everything. Poles and Jews have to equally share the blame. For real friendship to exist between Poles and Jews, the Holocaust industry has to be shut down once and for all. The Jews must publicly, in an international agreement, renounce any claims against Poland, which they have no right to at all. They have no right to any kind of money from Poland. Poland got the post-Jewish properties completely fair and square, completely legally. Poland owes Jews nothing. And the Jews have to finally admit it in print, in writing, and binding agreements before there can be genuine Polish-Jewish friendship. Then, what about Germany? Well, Germany doesn't pay the Poles. It only pays the Jews. So the Jews have to stop accepting any more payments from the Germans until the Germans pay the Poles. Even better, it would be if the state of Israel gave away a lot of its money to Poland and to the gypsies that it got from the Germans, based on the idea that all these groups have suffered, all these groups deserve compensation, and until they get it, this will never be right, will never be fair, we will never forget it. No justice, no peace, as I said before. Next slide. Okay, we keep hearing this notion that Poland has a duty to remember the Jews. Says who? Poland has no duty like that to anybody. Nobody has the duty to remember anybody else. Now, much has been said about Polish philo-Semitism, the explosion of interest in Jewishness in Poland, the dances, Poland Museum, Jewish food, things like that. Well, that's a two-edged sword. First of all, some Poles are rebelling against Poland's patriotic traditions and Catholicism by embracing Jewishness in that sense. They call it redemptive cosmopolitanism. Then there's also the mistaken notion by many Poles that if Poles get friendly with Jews, show respect for their culture and interest in them, that the Jews will respect us. Not so. Like I said before in a Jewish ingratitude webinar, when the Poles, idea that the Poles would be positive and talk about Polish rescuers of Jews, then the Jews will warm up to us. Not so. They only criticize us, they blame us anyway, and they want to focus on the Polish collaborators. That's all. They barely want to recognize the Polish rescuers. So it is with philo-Semitism, okay? Instead of liking it, they simply say that they simply disrespect it, like Jesus Christ said, "Do not cast your pearls before swine." That's kind of what's happened. See, one critic say Poles are flattering themselves when they do philo-Semitism, and Poles are silencing facts. Oh, really? What kind of facts are they supposed to be silencing? Oh, here we go again. The Holocaust industry. Poles are supposed to be talking about how they own post-Jewish property and how guilty they feel over the fact that they got post-Jewish property. That's absolute nonsense. Poland got the property fair and square. Poland does not owe the Jews anything. Next slide.
So Jan, explain for us how the Holocaust industry operates as an ongoing process of Jewish aggression against Poland, and tell us why it will remain a form of Jewish Polonophobia as long as it exists.
Okay, first of all, let us put Holocaust industry in a broader concept of collective guilt. Collective guilt was associated with the Nazis against the Jews, but now it's come back. When I hear all this wokeism stuff about white people being privileged as a group, that reminds me exactly what the Nazis said against the Jews. And what the Jews are now saying about the Poles. Let's look at this closely. Like the dark black line on the far left, an ethnic group. A tiny number of whites actually own slaves, but many more are guilty by complicity because they made the slavery machinery work. And a large fraction, the majority of the ethnic group, is guilty by cultural consensus that most white people thought that black people are inferior and they're suitable and fit for slavery. And so they're guilty in that sense. And finally, sooner or later, almost all whites benefited from slavery, regardless of if they were connected with slavery or not. So they're guilty. And then the leftists broaden it out. Leftists don't have to prove that every single white benefited from slavery. They just assign group guilt by fiat. You see an arrow up and down, it works for, and also works the future generation, inherited group guilt. Come to terms with the past. That is a favorite saying that Jews and leftists have. That means that there's an ongoing wrong that every member of the group is now guilty of, regardless of the passage of time, if they had anything to do with it. So, what's said, white people inherited the benefits of slavery. Therefore, future generations are also profiteers. White people are guilty collectively. It's a collective shame, like wearing the scarlet letter. Our history books talk about none about slavery. White people have to have guilt instilled into them. Finally, eventually whites, because they are white and no other reason, they'll have to pay reparations to self-designated African-American groups that had nothing to do with slavery either, okay? That's how collective guilt works. And that's modeled after what the Nazis did to the Jews. The Nazis accused the Jews of having international influence and of running the companies that made money off war. You know the old leftist saying, fight the rich, not the rich man's wars. Well, the Nazis modified it, fight the Jews, not the Jews' wars. In other words, the idea was that Jews want there to be wars so they could make money off ammunition and products, things like that. there was only a small number of perpetrator Jews who actually were in such positions that could influence the US government to go to war against Nazi Germany, and only a small number of perpetrators who actually directly made money off the arms that were made in the war. But a much larger set of Jews is guilty by complicity because they helped them. They made these influential Jews rise to their positions of power and privilege to be able to make wars and to make war against Germany. Then there was also a cultural consensus among Jews that the Jews should achieve. And one of these achievements was to become munition makers, influencers of government, to get war against Germany and things like that. And so then the idea is by the Nazis that all Jews will profit from the money that's been made by killing Germans in combat. And Goebbels said, killing German children by Allied bombing. The Jews are paying for the bombs that are killing German children. And so all the Jews are guilty because it will diffuse to all of it. Again, the Nazis don't have to prove that every single Jew benefited from the war. They just do it by fiat, the way leftists do it, blaming all white people for profiting from slavery without needing to prove it. And that's exactly what it works. And then the group guilt, the Jewish children will inherit the wealth that they got from German deaths. And so that's why they must die too. The Jewish children must not live to profit from the monies made by killing Germans in combats and by Allied bombing. That's the Nazi thinking. It's sick, but it's no less sick than the stuff that blames white people for slavery. All right, so Jews have to be ashamed. They have to wear the Star of David. They have to have all their wealth taken away from them. They have to be ostracized and separated from German society. And then they have to pay. They have to pay by giving up their property. And then they have to pay with their lives through extermination, the Holocaust. Goebbels said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. The Germans are getting even from all the profit that Jews collectively made, causing a world war to come on Germany, and Jews benefiting from the war against Germany. Now, same thing happens about Jews targeting Poles. You have a very small number of Poles who collaborated with the Germans or steadfastly refused to help the Jews. But much larger group of Poles worked with them, cooperated with them, supported them. So a larger group of Poles is guilty. Then the Jews accuse us of having a cultural consensus where Catholic cultures who supposedly were bigoted against Jews were not predisposed to help Jews, and we are very predisposed to help the Germans kill Jews. And again, the Jews don't have to prove that every single Pole is like that. It's the group guilt is assigned by them to us. That's why we inherit it. We have to come to terms with the past. We have to constantly beat our breasts over the fact that there were Polish collaborators and the Poles profited in a sense from the Jewish property that was left behind. Future generations of Poles have benefited from it. They have to be ashamed of it. And best of all, look at the top right, the Poles have to collectively pay money to the Holocaust industry to atone for their profiting from Jewish property that was left. But even though the Poles got it totally legally, doesn't matter. The Jews want to level a guilt trip and blame all Poles in this way. And too many people are falling for it. Next slide.
Now, Jan, we know there is a widespread contempt for Poles and Poland among Israeli Jews. So in this slide and the next, please show us why this is.
Okay. There's been a survey done of Israel. This is mainstream Jewish opinion, Times of Israel. Jews always talk about prejudice, anti-Semitism, prejudice, oh dear, but they're often the most prejudiced of all, as we shall see. 2/3 of Jews agree, Israeli Jews agree with the statement, Poland has been reluctant to fully accept responsibility for the role its citizens played during the Holocaust. There's at least 3 lies in that statement. Lie number 1, that the Poles had a role in the Holocaust. Nobody's ever defined it, what it means when it becomes a role in the Holocaust. Second lie is the implied Poles are supposed to accept responsibility. There's the collective guilt. You were a generation or 2 later after the war, and there's the collective guilt. We're supposed to accept responsibility for this presumed role in the Holocaust. Then the third lie is that we're reluctant to talk about ugly things in our history, which is a lie. Even nationalistic publications often talk freely talk about collaborators and things like that. There's at least 3 lies in that statement. It's a leading question, like have you stopped beating your wife? It's that kind of question. And of course, Holocaust supremacy rule. Nearly 3/4 of respondents said they agree with the statement. During the Holocaust, Poles were also victims of Nazi oppression, even though their suffering cannot be compared to the tragedy of the Jewish nation. There you have it again, Holocaust supremacism, a victim hierarchy where Jews have to be at the top and all sufferings are inferior to that of the Jews. It's pure racism. And you see, it's mainstream Jewish opinion. 3/4 of Jews almost believe in that. And then there's the bottom, there's a scholar, Israeli scholar, Omer Bartov. He said about the Holodomor, the Stalin's famine genocide of Ukrainians. Before they tried to explain it, explain it away by saying that Israel doesn't want to offend Turkey. That's why it doesn't recognize the Holodomor as a valid genocide. But Bartov blows that away. For Israel, recognizing the Holodomor as genocide would put it perilously close to the Holocaust. Oh dear. Hence, Ukrainians and Jews might be seen as equal victims. Horror of horrors, there can be equal victims. No victim hierarchy, no Holocaust supremacy. What's this world coming to? Next. Also, there's this Jewish scholar, Erika Lehrer. She studied Polish-Jewish relations for a long time. She used to be very Polonophobic. Now she's backed off a little bit, and she freely makes these admissions. There is a seemingly infinite Jewish capacity for bad news about Poland. Yeah, see, the Jews are predisposed to believe negative about Poles, even if they don't know what it is. There's something negative about Poles. It's part of their very mindset. I could say that Jews suck anti-Polonism in their mother's milk, to turn around what Yitzhak Shamir said about Poles and anti-Semitism. See, the configuration of much Jewish memory culture has seemed unable to assimilate any other news. In other words, Jews are prejudiced. They have a built-in antipathy towards Poles. It's not a question of Jews becoming educated, about Poles and Jews doing dialogue, about Poles and Jews getting to know each other as human beings instead of stereotypes. No, the Jewish Polonophobia is ingrained and it persists, and it has a purpose. Remember, the Jews often say that anti-Semitism serves a purpose. If Jews didn't exist, the anti-Semites would invent them because they need for their needs to put other people down, to put the Jews down. The Jews must be the designated scapegoat for one's failures. Now we can turn that around. If Poles didn't exist, the Jews would invent them because they need a whipping boy, a pariah, somebody they can put down. See? The beliefs that many Jews hold about Poland serve as supporting pillars of a collective consciousness, identity, and purpose. And of course, there's no proportion to what actually happened in the Holocaust. France and Lithuania especially collaborated Poland in, but so what? Jews today do not share the same kind of aspersions on France, Lithuania, or even Germany itself, the architect of the destruction. See, the Jews are totally soft on the Germans, and they want to put the blame for the Holocaust on the Poles. Even better are the Israeli teenagers. Now you see, sometimes this kind of anti-Polish bigotry is justified by a bad experience. When Yitzhak Shamir said that Poles suck anti-Semitism with their mother's milk, the Jews explained it away, saying, well, he's one individual who went through horrible experiences. You got to excuse him for that. Well, guess what? These Israeli teenagers are at least 3 generations removed from the Holocaust. They never had to go through any of these experiences. They just learned this hatred from their elders, okay? And because they're teenagers, they're immature. They'll tell you a teenager is cutting. A teenager will tell you exactly how he or she feels. And adults are sophisticated. They hide the prejudice. The Jews, Israeli teenagers from the mouths of babes, they tell you exactly how they feel. One of them said, somebody has to be guilty of the Holocaust. We have to hate someone, and we've already made up with the Germans. There it is. See, the Germans paid the Jews, so now the Jews are blaming the Poles and not the Germans. In the so-called marches of the living, some Israelis were against it, are against these marches. They say these marches should be focusing on the humanitarian aspects of the Holocaust, not as object enhancing Jewish nationalism, to which we add hatred against Poles. See? Marches of living. Yishai Sarid, He was a former Israeli intelligence officer. He knows what he's talking about. He knows something about human psychology and about how humans operate. He has to be, because he was an intelligence officer. See, he talks about the teenagers he led in Poland, Israeli teenagers. They didn't hate the Germans. The murderers barely registered in the narrative. They hated the Polish much more. When we walked around the streets and cities, wherever we met the local population, they would mutter words of hatred at them. Okay, and then another one, Thumb, she studied also these Israeli visits to Poland. In Poland, the Israeli flags are erected not against a current foe, but against the past enemy, the Nazis, the Poles, or Amalek. You see how nice. They don't call them Germans, they call them Nazis. And better yet, they fold the Poles along with the Germans and call them Nazis. Now, Amalek, that's an ancient pagan enemy, bad guy, an ancient pagan enemy of the Jews. And the Jews, as a typological sense, use Amalek as a kind of a boogeyman. So Poles are alongside the Germans and Amalek. I've been called an Amalekite a couple of times by Jews. Wow, I didn't know I was that powerful. I didn't know that I was a big killer, ancient killer of Jews. I didn't know I had such powers. See, and that's how it is. And now there was a recent fuss about Israeli flags at Auschwitz, and the same controversy existed with Poles. The Jews, in a sense, got a taste of their own medicine. Polish flags were challenged, and now Israeli flags were also challenged. See? Okay. No end to it. Next.
Now, Jan, we often hear the phrase Jewish Poles and non-Jewish Poles. So explain for us why this is a dishonest attempt to redefine the very idea of a Pole.
I noticed that this is fairly recent. I read a lot of books and I keep running across this phrase, Jewish Poles and non-Jewish Poles, okay? Somebody's trying to define us in terms of the Jews. Imagine that some Chinese moved to Poland and the book started calling them Chinese Poles and started calling the ethnic Poles non-Chinese Poles. Nonsense, but that's what they're doing. They're trying to impose on everybody to believe that Jews in Poland are Poles. See, it's in Google Books in recent years. Okay, now this has happened before. Nazi Germany, they tried to erase and negate the Poles. They occupied Poland, they didn't use Poland in any part of it then. Central Poland was called the general government. Western Poland, and next to the Third Reich, was called Warteland, the land of the Warta River. See, they don't want to use the word Poles. Now, these Poles have been delegitimized and negated. It's become an empty. What is a Pole? Anybody who lives on the territory in your 52 degrees north latitude and 20 east degree latitude is a Pole. So Poles are simply an assortment of any kind of people that come to this territory. Poles as an ethnicity, as a family, are delegitimized and canceled. It's like redefining the Smith family, okay? It's like saying anybody who sets foot in the Smith household is now a Smith. A Jew comes to Poland, is therefore a Pole. Nonsense. To add to the nonsense, this Jewish Poles and non-Jewish Poles business, think of this way: Smiths and non-Smiths. Absurd, but that's what they're doing. Now, a separate question: should Poland's Jews be considered? Well, you want to study this in detail? I conclude in the vast majority of cases, Poland's Jews were never Poles, exceptions aside. Okay. Jews were separatists from the very beginning. For 700 years, they spoke Yiddish. They didn't want to learn Polish. Those few Jews who did learn Polish were subject to peer pressure, that they're sellouts to the Jews, that they're copying out. So speaking Yiddish itself became a wall that the Jews created from the Poles. So in the vast majority of cases, there's much more to it than that. You can look up my bulletin. But finally, who decides what is what? We should decide that. We never got to vote whether we should be called non-Jewish Poles. We never got to vote whether Jews in Poland are Poles. It was simply imposed on us. This is wrong. Let's look at the Jews. The Jews don't simply accept anybody, a Jew who professes to be a Jew, who wants to be a Jew. They decide that. For example, generally, almost always, Jewish Christians are not recognized as Jews. Jews will not recognize Jewish Christian is a Jew. Not only the religious Jews, but the atheist Jews too. Atheist Jews say that religion doesn't really matter that much to being a Jew, except, of course, when it's a Jewish Christian, so it could be excluded from being a Jew. Now, I'm not raising this issue on its own. I'm just talking about equal standards. No Talmudic dual morality. If Jews can decide who is a Jew unilaterally without criticism, hell yes. Poles can decide who is a Pole. Nobody has the right to tell Poles who isn't a Pole. Nobody has the right to write books that imply or state things that the Poles never agreed to. Okay, people complain when I talk like this. This is ethno-nationalism. That's bad. No, that's nonsense. This business about pluralism and diversity and all that is simply a device for loosening the identities of people on the lands where they live. Ethno-nationalism is default. The vast majority of nations were made around an ethnic core. It was immeasurably easier to create and sustain a large state with a common ethnic space, with shared language, culture, and a sense of kinship. Yes, multi-ethnic nations like the Commonwealth of Poland before the partition, that was an exception. Vast majority of cases, it was about an ethnic core. Now, if another group of people comes to a nation like Poland and wants to be accepted, the Poles, they have to earn their acceptance. Like somebody wants to join the Smith family, they can't just show up in the Smith household and do whatever they want. No, they got to intermarry or be adopted and accepted by the Smith family to be a Smith. So it is with the Poles. Okay, the Armenians, one Jewish person complained about how acceptance must be earned. The Armenian problem never existed in Poland, despite the fact that Armenians were also a different race. For centuries, they enjoyed true equality. They were allowed to own land and hold public office. That's why they became citizens like all others. In other words, the Armenians came, they earned the Poles' respect. They really worked very hard to support Poland's struggles for independence. Jews generally did not. The Armenians often hung on to their particular customs and their religion. That's all right, but still they primarily were very strongly aligned with the Poles. Jews were not. Jews were separatists. So Jews did not earn Poland's acceptance. The Armenians did, and that's why the Poles accepted them as fellow Poles. Acceptance must be earned. That's how it is. Next.
Well, now, Jan, we come to the Holocaust comic book Maus, which has been around now for 3 decades, including in the classroom. And as you point out, this is another form of ongoing Jewish Polonophobia. So in the next 3 slides, please explain how Poles can better deal with this Polonophobic issue.
Okay, first of all, Maus is very popular. It's been translated to many languages, and it's totally Judeo-centric. Jews are the only victims, and they're the center of attention. Poles are only as pigs that collaborated with the Germans. And because Maus is so powerful, it's jealously guarded from classroom removal. Some parents objected to Maus and wanted to remove from the classroom because of its violence. And Jews objected strenuously. They lied. Oh, censorship. Censorship, nothing. Nobody's abolishing Maus. Nobody's making Maus illegal. Every library will continue having Maus. You can get it by Amazon. You could buy it anywhere. Nobody's censoring Maus. But they screamed about censorship. They wouldn't even accept this removal of Maus if it was replaced by another Holocaust book. No, because Maus is so powerful, and so they want to hang on to it. Now, it's given Spiegelman, Art Spiegelman, the one who wrote Maus, gave all kinds of baloney for his choices. Finally, he admitted his anti-Polish prejudice. So my metaphor, mice ought to be killed outright and pigs to be exploited and eaten. That itself is Holocaust supremacy, because it fallaciously claims that all Jews were scheduled for extermination, and only Poles, the pigs, were exploited, which is not true. Some mice, Jews, were also used for exploited for a while. And given enough time to pigs, the Poles would also be exterminated. That's Holocaust supremacy right there. No, somehow able to hold that particular vantage point was still somehow acknowledging my father's dubious opinion of Poles as a group. There, Spiegelman admits it. He's following his father's prejudices. Since when does one's father's prejudices become legitimate classroom material? But that's what Spiegelman has done. And it's not just the words, it's the imagery. Even the way they're drawn, the cats have the most human of the faces. The pigs have those unsightly snouts. See? Even in imagery, the Germans are more favorable than the Poles. When impressionable children see that, what do they think? What do you think they will think? And Spiegelman is giving a song and dance. Well, they're all animals, no cats, mice, pigs, no difference. Baloney. In Jewish thinking, pigs are especially abominable. Cursed is he who grows pigs, it says in the Talmud. It's brought up by Talmudic scholar Steinsaltz. Now, there's lots of unclean animals. The flesh of mice, the flesh of cats, the flesh of camels, flesh of horses, and many more are unclean. But only the pig has such an abomination in Jewish thinking. Now, at the bottom, there's one Jew who actually admits that the Poles are right. One Jew, Henry Gonschak, admittedly Polish anger at Maus is at least somewhat understandable. The Poles suffered horribly under the Nazis. You'd never find that in Maus, who viewed the Poles as a subhuman race, scarcely less vile than the Jews. That's right. Jews are not above everybody else. It's unfair to focus exclusively on Polish anti-Semitism in sympathy with the final solution, as too many Holocaust representations do, especially in America. Yeah, but that's how it is. Everything's blamed on the Poles. The Poles are falsely accused of liking the Holocaust and glad that the Germans did. That's another lie, and he confronts it. Here he's one Jew against millions. How much influence does Spiegelman have, and how much influence does a good Jew like Gonschak have? Hardly any. We see it again and again and again. Next slide. Okay, now here's what I suggest. In the past, we've complained about Maus. Complaints will get us nowhere, okay? Because people won't listen to us. We don't have any political clout. We can't do anything with it. We got to do something else. Not censorship, but more speech. Since the Jews find it okay to put a Polish pig in the classroom, we should spite them by insisting that a Jewish pig be brought into the classroom. On the left is a German sculpture of the JUDENSAU, the Jewish pig, centuries old. It's partly weathered. To update it, I put a Star of David on it. And here's how the JUDENSAU is described. Became the commonest of all motives for the Jew and one of the most potent and enduring of abusive stereotypes. It assumed a variety of repellent forms. Jews were portrayed venerating the soul, sucking its teeth, embracing its hindquarters, devouring its excrement. Indeed, it is clear that the gross indecency of the image was the prime reason for its popularity over 600 years. Yeah, it's pretty powerful, okay? So much for the baloney. Oh, pigs are not, Polish pig, that's nothing. Yes, it is something. The German pig is certainly something. In fact, in German law against so-called hate speech, it's very selective and very hypocritical. The dual morality again. Calling a Jew a Judensau, a Jewish pig, that's a hate crime. But Maus is allowed in the German classroom, so calling a Pole a pig is not a hate crime. See, the dual morality, the double standard, Jewish favoring, double standard. Now, if we could get the Judensaus for more speech, get it into the classroom, we could have some classroom lessons based on, do something positive, teach the kids. And porky pig gas, oh, it's a pig, that's nothing. Yes, it is something. Ask the kids, why is it okay to show Poles as pigs, as in Maus? Well, it's always wrong to portray Jews as pigs, as in Judensau. Simple, because the kids will arrive, because the Jews have the political power and the Poles do not. The Poles are at the bottom of the totem pole. Then Spiegelman keeps saying that all animals, they're all animals, all the characters are animals, mice, cats, pigs, it's nothing, they're all the same. Well, ask the kids, if Spiegelman is right that animals are the same, why didn't the Germans over 6 centuries use mice and cats equally with pigs as a slur on Jews? Why not sometimes call Jews mice, sometimes call them cats, and sometimes call them obvious, because the pig has unique derogatory characteristics that other animals don't have. And then the third class and discussion would address Spiegelman's lies. He lies by saying, well, he's just copying Nazi imagery. That's a lie. First of all, the Nazis were never cats. I've read lots of literature by Nazis and about Nazis. Never once did the Nazis call themselves cats. And nor were Jews just mice. Sometimes there were mice and rats, sometimes there were pigs, oh yes, sometimes there were worms, insect larvae, or worst of all, the poison mushroom, der Giftpilz, which was mentioned in Nuremberg as one of the worst stereotypes of the Jew. The idea is that just as a poison mushroom is sneaky in that it can look and taste like a wholesome mushroom, but it's deadly, so likewise, the Jew is sneaky and devious. The German Jew can look very much and act very much the same as an ordinary German, but he's really a Jew and he's dangerous and he's poison. That's the idea that gets the point across. That's why I was brought up at Nuremberg. And that's why the Nazis made the Jews wear the Star of David, because Jews are sneaky and devious. They must wear identification over the fact, show the fact that they are Jews. That was the idea. Nazis calling Jews mice and rats, that was comparatively trivial. So Spiegelman is wrong even there. Then, of course, the specific lies about Poles that are in Maus. The notion of Poles were well-fed. They were not. They were starving. That Poles did the Nazi salute. They did not. That Poles were just collaborators. Very rarely so. And, of course, Jewish crimes omitted. The scene shows a Jew being hung by Poles when he went to reclaim his property. We have to tell him equal time for Jewish crime. We demand the classroom also cover the fact that Jews murdered Poles as under communism. And then we could extend this lesson as kids know more. What other Holocaust-related lies can you spot? Of course, this will never happen. We'll never get in the classroom. But just simply, it's better than just complaining about Maus, trying to force the JUDENSAU into the classroom just to make the point and stir the consciousness raising of how insulting and inappropriate it is for Poles to be pigs in the classroom. Keep the issue alive. Keep bringing up the Jewish pig. Okay, now I'll add something totally positive, our own story. Next slide, please. Okay, this is, I proposed a counter MAUS comic. If somebody who's a cartoonist could draw it, and we could produce it and distribute it, and get classes to carry it, that would be good. In my cartoon, snakes are the Germans, mongooses are the Poles, rats are the Jews, and bears are the Soviets. So the plot is this. The Germans invade Poland. That's number one. Number two, the brave Poles fight and kill some of the Germans, much more powerful than they are. And then the Germans start hunting for the Jews. And then some of the Jews help the Germans find the Judenrats and the Jewish ghetto police. Eventually, the Soviets drive out the Germans, but then a lot of the Jews come out of hiding and join the Soviets in persecuting the Poles, okay? This is much more realistic than Maus. It identifies the Germans, the snakes, the most repulsive, as the big and the biggest bad guys. It shows Poles in their rightfully heroic role, fighting on and taking on the Germans. Poles are the mongooses. It shows the Jews were not just victims, they also collaborated with the Germans to destroy other Jews. And it also shows the oppression by the Soviet communists where they conquered Poland. A second occupation began. And then finally it shows that, yes, Jews also collaborated with the Soviets in to go against the Poles. This is much more realistic than what Maus is, much more educational. We should have a cartoonist draw it, and it should be pushed into a classroom. At least get some kind of coverage, some kind of notice by people, some kind of alternative, positive alternative to Maus. Instead of trying to censor Maus, which will never work anyway, we have more speech. MUNGO, which is the term for mongoose, my proposed counter MAUS comic to be drawn, developed, and sent out into the classrooms. Next slide.
Now, Jan, we know that very often Jews will play the victim card. So in the next three slides, show us how this longstanding problem adversely affects Poland.
Okay, Jews always make themselves a victim. It's not of the Holocaust. It's about victims of pogroms. Well, first of all, according to a thinking of Moses Maimonides, Middle Ages rabbi, any Jew found dead by murder is assumed that he was murdered because he was a Jew. You don't have to establish that he was murdered because he was a Jew. He could have been simply robbed, coincidentally. No, anti-Jewish motive is assumed. A rabbi named Huberban went any further. Any goy slain Jew is a martyr. So you see, it's a Jewish supremacy against, like in the Talmud where it says, hitting a Jew is like hitting God. Okay, that's the Jews are supreme. They're above everybody else. Merely a goy killing a Jew makes the Jew a martyr. Even if you know he wasn't killed because he was a Jew, even so, the fact that a goy killed a Jew alone makes the Jew a martyr. Now notice the term pogrom. It's an Orwellian Judeo-centric exclusivist term. There are no such terms for other violence. For example, Hindus kill Muslims in India, or the other way around. There's no special term for that. The objective term should be deadly ethnic riot. These occur all over the world, but only the Jews have a special name for when it's done to them. It's a pogrom. That itself shows supremacy. No other people on earth have a special term for violence done to them. Now, there are in fact some Jews who oppose this because called lachrymose Jewish history, the idea that Jews should be constantly focused on being victims, being persecuted, and going through pogroms and stuff. They're opposed to that, but there's very few of those. Now, a lot of the pogroms are hoaxes. Like for a long time, Jews were accusing Christians of massacring, Christian crusaders massacring Jews in Jerusalem. Probably never happened. In New York in 1906, there was supposed to be a pogrom. Some Jewish so-called eyewitnesses said that they saw American teachers cutting the throats of Jewish children. The Jews believed it all. They were absolutely hysterical. It was a totally bogus pogrom. Then there's the pogrom propaganda. Poland, 30,000 Jews killed by Poles in massive pogroms. Morgenthau refuted it, and that's another hoax. Now, Haller's Blue Army was supposed to do pogroms on Jews and even cut their beards off. Problem is that some places where Haller's army never was, it's impossible for him to have done it. These are just made up anti-Polish stories. In fact, Haller in his memoirs actually poked fun at these accusations. He mentioned a Polish policeman going up to another Pole, handing him a pair of scissors, asking him to cut his beard off. You know, they're not mocking the Jews, mocking these Jewish lies about Haller and Poles. Then, of course, there's something we never hear about. Jews doing violence to other Jews. Are those pogroms too? Of course not. When a Jew does violence to another Jew, that's nothing. I have 12 book reviews on this subject about Jew on Jew violence, and it's all memory hold, all forgotten. Now, there's more to it than that. Like in the Rhineland, Germany, those crusaders who killed some Jews, and Jews embellished it. What's interesting is that the Jews started killing other Jews too, because they wanted to get God angrier. The idea that God will take, Jews were vindictive. They wanted God to take revenge against all Christians, not just against the Christians who were killing Jews. Just like Purim, Feast of Purim spiels, celebrating Jewish revenge. So the Jews slayed other Jews to increase the victim death toll so that God would be angry. Or somehow God is not supposed to notice the difference between a Jew killed by another Jew and a Jew killed by a Christian, but apparently that's what they think. They want to stoke God's anger. That's how Jews think or thought at that time. Now, there's a whole bunch of pogroms that Jews actually started. Poland, 1936, Shittek pogrom. Polish merchants and Jewish merchants, they are in competition. They had stalls filled with vegetables. It was for a while, it was just name calling and boycotts. And then, so Jews were the first to introduce violence. The pogrom is their fault. They're the first to overturn a produce stall that belonged to a Pole. And the Poles retaliated by not overturning a Jewish stall. Then the Jews introduced firearms into the country. The Jews started shooting at the Poles, not those who were beating up Jews, but any Pole, indiscriminately, okay? So Jews were the first to introduce firearms. They're the first to do a homicide and make the slaying collective in nature. But now, of course, only the Poles are blamed for them. Even though the Jews started, they made it all ordinary unpleasantries into violence, and then gun violence, and then homicidal violence. The Jews did that, but Poles are blamed. Same thing in 1937, Jewish pogrom. There was a Jewish butcher involved in illegal meat trade. When a Polish policeman tried to arrest him, he shot the Polish policeman, and that's Poles returned to violence. But of course, now Poles are blamed. Jews are always the victims. Jews do never anything wrong. Then there's the pogroms that did happen, but they're greatly exaggerated. The Khmelnytsky revolt, I've seen Jewish sources that talk about hundreds of thousands of slain Jews. The actual total was small. It was actually 14,000. After the Russian Civil War, I actually studied pogroms. Gurgel study 31,000 slain Jews. But Jews have embellished it to 300,000 or so. They ignore other people killed, over 1 million Ukrainians. Does it try to change their, but they were killed as Jews. How do you know that? We don't know. There's people were killed for various motives. Some were killed as Ukrainians, some were killed as Armenians, Mennonites, etc. But only the Jews get all this embellished attention like they're the only victims. Okay. Now, in some cases, the Jews provoked the pogroms themselves. Okay, in Russia, we talk about the pogroms in Russia. The Jews always do scapegoating. They blame the Tsar for stirring up the Jews. The Tsar is failing. He needs somebody to blame to divert attention. So he stirs up hatred against the Jews. I'm not one to stick up for the Tsar, but that's a lie. There's nothing in Russian archives that supports any notion of the Tsar being behind the pogroms. And then they also blame the church. The Jews always blame Christianity, that the church has stirred up the masses against it. That's another lie. No such thing happened. So the pogroms didn't just happen randomly. They happened in specific years: 1881-82, 1903 to 1906, 1917, 1920. It was all from economics. The Jews were economic class. For centuries, the Jews didn't want to do farming even when allowed to. They just wanted to handle money and goods because Jews are very intelligent. They want to do intellectual work. They don't want to do farming. They tend to look at manual labor as goy work, and they can make more money by moving money around than they can by raising crops. So usually, most of the time, they didn't. They developed a codependency with the peasants. The peasants depend on the Jews to sell the products, and then the peasants depend on the Jews to sell the products, and the Jews depend on the peasants to be a reliable clientele and for there to be social peace so the Jews can function in this role. Okay, the share of Jews among local grain traders was a strong predictor of pogroms when political turmoil coincided with periods of high grain prices. During political turmoil, debtors could not commit to paying in the future, and consequently, moneylenders and grain traders had to demand immediate repayment. This led to ethnic violence in which the break in the relationship between the majority and the Jewish middlemen was the igniting factor. There was specific economic turmoil when the Jews had to really apply the screws to the peasants, and the peasants could really feel the Jewish exploitation. Some were bankrupted and things like that. I could do a whole webinar on the Jewish middleman and all what that led to, but that's the idea. It was causative by factors. It wasn't because of the Tsar. It wasn't because of the church. It was because of Jewish conduct, the way you positioned themselves as privileged economic people over the peasantry. Okay, next slide. Okay, now, at the same time, always about Jews as victims, okay? Like Holocaust survivors say things. Now, lots of books, I noticed that there's certain patterns, certain stories keep coming up over and over again, okay? And then, for example, about a fugitive Jew overhearing some other Poles talking about killing that Jew, okay? But then there was this one who showed what it's imagination. But then I started hearing whispers in the village about me. Or maybe they were the rattlings in my own head, okay? So it shows that Jews are confusing their own prejudices against Poles with actual danger from Poles. Now, other Holocaust survivors are not reliable. For example, a lot of them said that they saw Mengele, were processed by Mengele, as a Mengele was there in Auschwitz 24/7. He was not. Obvious falsehood. Hungarian Jews say Mengele spoke Hungarian to them. False. Mengele did not speak Hungarian. Now, Sobibor, a lot of people, Jews claim they were survivors, doubtfully there. Made obviously false statements about Sobibor, which indicates that they are not there. Then, Holocaust survivors promote the soap legend, the idea that the Germans turned bodies into soap. That was current for a while, and survivors were simply telling stories, things that memories are made, and they're filtered through extant ideas and narratives. Now, if you have a lot of anti-Polish prejudice, which you do, Holocaust survivors will hear a lot of anti-Polish stories from other Jews. And then they will believe these stories and accept them as their own, as if they experienced it, even though they didn't. These are all made up anti-Polish lies, but these Holocaust surviving Jews will accept it and believe it, which is why, as I said, like two webinars up there, that we should not believe uncorroborated Jewish Holocaust survivor testimony, because Jews absorb fallacious anti-Polish tales. In fact, Judge Hofmeier of the Frankfurt Auschwitz trial said, even the ideal witness wants to tell the truth and separate facts from fiction, will project things and things others describe vividly in that setting as his own experiences. There's a constant danger, reinforced by the anti-Polish feelings among many Jews where such stories spread. And then finally, Ferdinand said, we start to claim them from our own. These recollections can be very vivid, not things we experienced, things we've heard from others, okay? Implanting false memories. The misinformation effect can be applied to entire fictional episodes, not just details of events. So you have all these anti-Polish stories floating around. The Jewish survivors absorb them, and then they testify and repeat them as if they really happened. And then these anti-Polish Holocaust scholars believe it and accuse the Poles. That's how it is. Next slide. Okay. We see lots of writers in America and elsewhere have written against Poles. This is a short list of just some of them. It's only a tiny fraction of them. And it does not even touch the many anti-Polish Jews in media and academia. And of course, the Holocaust movies seen by millions of people with the anti-Polish images. They're probably even more powerful than what's written. Jewish Polonia is everywhere, shaping public opinion against the Poles. Next slide.
Now, Jan, Poland often suffers in international politics, as, for example, from the ongoing European Union and Jewish leftist attempts to dilute or dismantle the Polish Catholic culture. So in these final three slides, please illustrate how this process continues.
Okay. First of all, the European Union serves the Jews. Poland had to join, and the European Union has been trying to force the Holocaust narrative on Poland. You have these others complaining about the lack of centrality of the Holocaust as a defining memory of the 20th century experience across the post-communist state. She's complaining that these Poles are not falling in line with this Jewish way of thinking, and they're bad because of that. Okay. European Union. There is no other historical event to which European institutions have demonstrated any comparable deep commitment. Yeah, the Jews in their Holocaust gets all the attention, all the rah-rah, and the Poles get nothing. And the Europeans set up the conference in Stockholm, which reinforced, see, same old Holocaust supremacy and Holocaust superlatives. The Stockholm Declaration recognizes, among other things, the Holocaust fundamentally challenged the foundations of civilization. Yes, and the murder of millions of Poles and other Slavs did not. Holocaust supremacy. The unprecedented character of the Holocaust. Oh yeah, and the other deaths of 100 million goys who were not, in genocide in the 20th century alone. That's not unprecedented, that's just common. Only the Jews are special, only their deaths are unprecedented. We'll hold universal meaning. Oh yeah, Poles deaths don't hold any in universal meaning. They're nothing. Next slide. Okay, now the Holocaust has also been used as a weapon for forced immigration. The Poles were spanked for not accepting foreign immigrants. The Poles haven't learned anything from the Holocaust. The Poles are intolerant because they won't accept immigrants. Hell no. We decide who we let into Poland. Nobody's going to tell us who is tolerant or what we are and are not supposed to do. And in a few cases also Israel as well. They tried to use the Holocaust, say, well, Jews themselves have to be tolerant to Africans coming to live in Israel. Not so. Israel for the Jews and Poland for the Poles. Poland must remain ethnically Polish with a Roman Catholic culture. See, opinion within the government has run strongly against these claimants. All right. Israel must preserve its Jewish character, and that a huge influx of foreigners poses an existential threat to the country. Exactly right. The Jews have a right to protect the state of Israel as a distinctively Jewish state, and hell yes, the Poles have a right to protect the Polish nation as a distinctive ethnic Polish and Catholic country. No double standards, no dual morality. The Jews can do it, we can do it too. We must be able to do it, and we must do it. Not for all this baloney about pluralism and diversity and all that. Next slide. Okay, now, from time to time, Poles have been called paranoid for suggesting that these leftist groups, internationalists, George Soros types and others are trying to undermine Poland's Catholic culture. And it's paranoid for Poles to think that the Jews, such a tiny minority in Poland, could possibly try to overturn Poland's Catholic culture. But no, we don't need conspiracy theories. The Jews are on record saying so. Erika Lehrer, the one who studied Polish-Jewish relations, she knows what she's talking about. In the mainstream publication, Jewish heritage has functioned in important ways as a tool for Poles to reimagine a country in pluralist terms. Yeah, there's that code word for dismantling Polish Catholic culture. In a contemporary demographic in which 95% of Polish citizens are baptized Catholics, Jewish heritage is both a vehicle to reclaim aspects of a period of history, multi-ethnic existence. No thanks. You know how bad that was in Poland with all these minorities before World War II struggling with each other across Polish terrain. To envision a future Poland that may stand among peers as an increasingly multi-ethnic European Union. There you have it again, the European Union pushing for Poland to be diluted, for the Polish Catholic character to be diluted, and for Poland to be a dumping ground for immigrants. Never, we'll never put up with that. And then another author wrote, in other words, how can Jews and Jewishness be normalized? Part of the answer is to work even harder, problematizing the Catholicity of Polishness. Oh, how nice. Here they show right. Our paranoia is very well. We don't have to worry about George Soros or the international or the globalists. No. We have it right here in the Jews saying rightly they're against Poland's national, they're openly hostile to Poland's Catholic tradition. There you have it, smoking gun. We don't need conspiracy theories. And you see, better yet, if we Polish leftists like Lubzycka say, the Catholicity of Polishness is a problem. Oh, so it's a problem. Somebody has a problem. They should be the problem. The leftists are the problem. They should be kicked out. The Jews should be stopped. The Jews are the problem. Polish Catholicism is not the problem. It belongs to the Poles. Attacks on Poland, that's the problem. So, forewarned is forearmed. There you have it right there, the hostility to Poland's Catholic and national traditions. Polska dla Polaków, Poland for the Poles. Say it again. Polska dla Polaków, Poland for the Poles. Czołem wielki Polsce. Hail great Poland.
Okay, Jan, as we come to a close on our webinar, we at Posse EDU thank you for your interest in our webinars. And Jan, thank you for explaining why Polish, or I should say Jewish, Polonophobia continues to persist, and why Polish-Jewish dialogue and the recent philo-Semitism in Poland have not substantially changed anything. You discussed in detail how the 35-year-old MAUS comic book operates as unending Jewish Polonophobia par excellence, by falsely teaching generations of impressionable American children a blatantly fictitious image of Poles and the calculated lie that Poles serve the Germans. And lastly, we reviewed the recent attempt to force immigrants upon Poland, which are part of a long-term European Union plan to weaken, if not dismantle, Poland's distinct ethnic and Catholic identity. And so with that, we thank our viewers for your interest, and we bid you all do widzenia and goodbye.
Good night.